EF20 Online is sponsored by the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City and KKFI 90.1 FM, Kansas City Community Radio. The Fight for Our Future is made possible by American Public Square at Jewell and Unity Temple on the Plaza. Please welcome our host, Clare Bishop.
Hello, good evening. Thank you so much for the introduction. And on behalf of the entire team at American Public Square, a huge thanks to each of you for joining us this evening and welcome to our program, The Fight for Our Future. I'm so pleased to be able to give introductory remarks this evening. I'm grateful that we have an opportunity to showcase the work that's being done by our student committee as a part of our APS 2020 student initiative. This initiative enables us to bring our mission of elevating the tone and quality of public discourse to college and high school classrooms with two objectives: to help educate students on the critical need for public discourse in a strong, well-functioning democracy, and to also equip young people in our community with the tools and resources they need to develop impactful programming on issues that matter to them. I'd like to express our gratitude to funders who provide support for the APS student initiative, including the Sherman Family Foundation, the McDonald Foundation, and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. This support makes it possible for us to bring these active learning opportunities to the classroom and to the community. And on a really personal note, I want to say just how impressed with and proud of the work that the entire staff at APS have been with the work that the students have done on this program. And not to mention that when we started the semester, the plan was to conduct an APS signature style event in partnership with the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City in person. And obviously circumstances have changed. We've watched our students adapt masterfully to the new scenario, and I'm really pleased with the thoughtful program that we're going to be bringing to you tonight. So thank you so much to our students. With that, I'd like to introduce you to your true host for this evening, our APS Student Initiative Coordinator, Ms. Allison Kelzer. Allison?
Thank you, Claire, and thank you to those of you joining us this evening for the Fight for Our Future, addressing climate change policy and individual responsibility. This program was made possible by the hard work of the APS Spring 2020 intern team, the APS Student Planning Committee, the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City, and Unity Temple on the Plaza. As you all may know, APS relies on the support of its members to maintain its programming. Thank you to our members for your continued engagement and support. And remember to check in on our upcoming events via our website at americanpublicsquare.org/events. We hope that those of you who are not yet members will take the opportunity to tonight officially join us. You can find information about membership on our website at americanpublicsquare.org/membership. I would like to thank the following program and presenting sponsors for tonight's program: Marnie and John Sherman, the City of Kansas City, Missouri, the Hall Families Foundation, the H&R Block Foundation, Sue Siedler, Louis Nerman, PlexPod, and William Jewell College. Tonight's fact sheet and fact checkers were made possible by the APS intern team. Jack Still from William Jewell College will be our fact checker this evening. This is really important. To obtain tonight's fact sheet and program, please visit our website at americanpublicsquare.org/events/student program to download the fact sheet and program for tonight. Students from William Jewell College, Lydia Engie and Jessica Sloan, will be our roving reporters, asking your questions to the panelists. Denisha Snell, our program manager, has a civility bell. It will be rung if the tone of the conversation becomes less than civil. It is now my privilege to introduce tonight's panel moderator, the president and founder of Climate Council of Greater Kansas City, Bob Grove.
Thank you, Allison, and good evening to everyone. And thank you for joining us, and welcome to American Public Square Jewell's first ever digital panel discussion. It's my pleasure to be tonight's moderator. I have the honor of serving as the president of the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City, and I'm looking forward to tonight's comments and discussion. So let's welcome our panelists. Freddy Sourgens is joining us from St. Louis, Missouri. He is the director of the Washburn Oil and Gas Law Center and professor of law at Washburn University School of Law. Freddy serves as editor-in-chief of Oxford University Press's Investment Claims, which reports on international arbitral awards between states and foreign investors. Freddy is also the author and editor of over a dozen books and is currently contributing to a textbook on international petroleum transactions published by the Rocky Mountain Mineral Law Foundation. He is co-authoring the Transnational Law of Renewable Energy with Teddy Baldwin and Catherine Bannett. And this book is scheduled to be released in 21 or 22 from the Oxford University Press. Please welcome Professor Sourgens. Steve Melton, joining us from Parkville, Missouri. Steve, can you turn on your camera, please? Steve served as a U.S. Army officer until his retirement from active duty in 2004. For the next 12 years, he taught at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And I'm going to go looking for Steve before we go any further.
Right. I can't open.
We should have a pop-up that's saying, there's Steve.
There we go. Thank you.
So I was just telling people that you taught at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where, among other things, you instructed graduate seminars on the causes and impacts of global warming. Steve began volunteering with Citizens Climate Lobby in the spring of 2017 after learning about the organization at the Prairie Village Earth Day Festival, and he is now the co-leader of the Kansas City chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. He graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, and earned a master's degree from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Steve lives with his wife, Susan. So please welcome Steve Melton. Richard Mabion, please turn on your camera. Richard is joining us from Kansas City, Kansas. And Richard has been born and raised in Kansas City, Kansas. We will find Richard here. It's the wonders of technology. So Richard, you should see a little box turning on camera. There's Richard. How are you? So Richard, after serving in the United States military, he spent 3 decades as a self-taught urban social engineer and businessman in both Kansas City and St. Louis. Since 2006, he has worked as an independent community organizer in the environmental movement. In 2007, Richard founded an environmental literacy organization called Building a Sustainable Earth Community. He has since been recognized for his commitment to involving more people of color in environmental causes, and a commitment that led to the creation of an environmental literacy conference called Breaking the Silence. Richard is the president of the Kansas City, Kansas branch of the NAACP and the first African-American board member of the Kansas Sierra Club. Please welcome Richard Mabion. And Mike Kelly, mayor of Roeland Park, Kansas. Can you join us, Mike?
Hello.
Hello. Welcome. Mike is, as I said, the mayor of Roeland Park, Kansas, and he's also the chairman and co-founder of Climate Action KC, an organization of elected and business leaders with a regional focus on climate mitigation and adaptation actions throughout the Kansas City metro area. Mike graduated from Kansas State University with degrees in journalism and political science and earned his law degree from the University of Kansas School of Law. Mike is an attorney at Hush Blackwell and practices in the field of civil litigation. He and his wife, Elizabeth, have one daughter, Virginia. Please welcome Mayor Kelly.
Thank you very much.
So tonight's discussion is framed around how our systems and institutions can address climate change and what role individual responsibility plays. We'll begin by asking each panelist to briefly describe their position on this panel. Let's start with Freddy. As director of the Oil and Gas Law Center at Washburn and having contributed to multiple academic journals on this topic, In light of recent climate change developments, why should we continue to produce oil and gas?
Thank you so much for the question. And first of all, thank you to everybody for the great work that the student organizers have done. And thank you for having me on this esteemed panel. Let me start off by saying that it would be irresponsible to deny that climate change is happening. Climate change is happening. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change represents the best science on climate change, and one should not run away from that. The position that I represent is that we need to manage a sustainable path to our energy future. And that sustainable path to our energy future means that we need to have safe, cheap, and reliable energy that can manage our reconstruction after COVID and that can manage the global energy demands that we have and energy demands right here in Kansas City. And that we need to also consider as one part in that we've seen at the moment, that global supply chains are severely under stress. And one of the things that oil and gas provide us is energy security and energy independence. So maintaining an energy independent, sustainable path to our energy future is the reason we should continue to produce oil and gas.
Thank you, Freddy. Steve, as co-leader of the Citizens Climate Lobby Kansas City, can you provide an overview of the legislative action your group supports? I believe that's House Resolution 763, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act.
Yes. Thanks for the question, Bob. Hello, I'm Steve Melton from Citizens Climate Lobby. We're a nationwide and international group of 180,000 volunteers working to stop climate change through the legislative process. And before I go on, I want to give many thanks to American Public Square, William Jewell College, and our hundreds of listeners at this great event. We now have a bill before the U.S. House of Representatives that will actually stop global warming. It's called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, or House Resolution 763. And Kansas City's own Emanuel Cleaver is one of its 80 bipartisan co-sponsors. This bill places a cash fee on each ton of fossil fuel produced, and that fee increases every year. All the fees collected are distributed back to the people as monthly dividends. How cool will it be for you to get a check every month paid for by the coal and petroleum corporations? And because everyone gets the same carbon dividend, the smaller your carbon footprint, the more money you make. By financially incentivizing people and businesses not to burn fossil fuels, we can reduce CO2 emissions by 40% over the first 12 years and get on track to meet our Paris commitments to be carbon neutral by 2050. In fact, putting a price on carbon is mankind's single most powerful weapon against global warming. We thank Kansas City Mayor Quentin Lucas and the KC City Council for making carbon fee and dividend a 2020 federal legislative priority. You can learn more about Citizens Climate Lobby and the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act by going to our website at kccl.org. That's kccl.org. Thank you for all you do to save life on our planet, and vote climate in this crucial election year.
Thank you, Steve. Richard, you're a community organizer and the founder of Building a Sustainable Earth Community. Can you explain the main objectives of your group?
Yes, the way the group came about, first of all, when I saw those people who I consider everyday people, I knew as a former civil rights person who had involved working people that there was a need for someone to be able to find a way to be able to reach people so they would not be as was to her that needed some type of on-the-spot type leadership. So then I found out about this environmental world because of what happened. Within that book, they talked about Earth community. That was a term they used at the Rio summit. Many of y'all, I'm sure all of you are climate people, you are very much aware of that summit. That is where the name came from. And what got me is when I was reading David's book, he made a statement: leadership to create a world that works for all is more likely to come from those who have lived in the real world and consequently are intimately acquainted with the injustice, violence, and the environmental failure that the empire has created. It was that statement that prompted me to get involved in the environmental world, but it was also the Earth Charter that prompted me to start this building a sustainable Earth community.
Thank you, Richard. Mike, you're the co-founder of Climate Action KC. Why is Climate Action KC focused on local and regional climate actions as opposed to federal? How can local action make measurable progress?
Oh, thank you very much, Bob, and thank you to everyone at American Public Square for the invitation to be here tonight. Thank you to my fellow esteemed panelists. I'm looking forward to a robust discussion. Cities have a unique opportunity to be leaders in a changing climate. I think as we've all seen, there's been an abdication of leadership on the issue at the federal level, and states have moved forward, but things move slowly. And where we're positioned here in Kansas City, energy policy moves slowly in Topeka or Jefferson City. There's a unique opportunity and also a necessity for cities to be the leaders in climate action. It's true that the majority of the world's population lives in an urban environment. 75% of global CO2 emissions come from those urban areas, and about 2/3 of the world's energy is consumed in an urban setting. Therefore, there's necessity for change to come from cities. Luckily, cities have been the hubs of culture and of innovation and of commerce for hundreds of years. And cities are nimble in their government. Local government really has the opportunity to roll up its sleeves and to get things done for its constituents. They can be efficient, and cities can be efficient in their infrastructure and planning processes and have an opportunity to implement solutions and be laboratories of democracy and show proof of concept for actions to be taken at a state or a federal level. That's why I'm happy to be here today representing over 100 elected officials in Kansas City as part of Climate Action KC as we work towards implementing these solutions and reaping the co-benefits that they produce for our region.
Thank you, Mike. I want to welcome our listening audience on KKFI 90.1 FM. And for those of you that are logged into the interactive forum, you'll find a small Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We welcome you to submit your questions and fact checks for us to process and look at as we go along. Your questions will be handled by our roving reporters and shared with our panelists. And if you're sending us a fact check, if you've heard something that you would like to have fact checked, please precede that with a fact check : and then describe what you'd like for us to look into. So let's take some questions, and these will be directed to an individual panelist, and after that person is answered, then the rest of the panelists are invited to comment. So let's start with Richard. Richard, what level of participation, specifically in lower income communities, should public service works take in creating awareness of climate change issues?
I think the Public Works Group for their role and within a low-income community, there's one thing that just does not exist. People have an attitude and idea about what's going on as far as climate change. We see more in our Black community. At first, we will say that it's got to see on my trips in and out of the community is the fact that people are not wearing masks, they're not wearing, really taking serious the things that should be taken serious. You have to cause people to stand off of you when you walk into a store. 6 foot. what we need to be doing as far as the social service aid is making sure we're doing people aware of the fact that climate change is for real.
Thank you, Richard. I think we're all having a little trouble hearing. I mean, it's just the internet connection, and there's nothing we can do about that. But I appreciate your comments. And throw this open to the rest of the panel, the idea of how do we engage and create awareness among the lower income communities and the role of public service works in that.
Well, I think it's absolutely clear, and I appreciate Richard's work in bringing this and continuing to carry the torch and bring it to everyone's attention. But even the fourth iteration of the National Climate Assessment made it incredibly clear that the most vulnerable populations and the lowest income communities would be more drastically affected by a changing climate. So I think there's a clear necessity that we need to have increased focus on our most vulnerable communities as we prepare for the impacts of a changing climate. I think there's also important opportunities there for workforce development, as well as increased economic opportunities to provide not only security from the risks, but also economic opportunities. So I think, and agree with Richard, that it's key as we move forward as in any climate plan.
Steve, how does the dividend package, I mean, how does that address this community?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that poor communities live in the most polluted places in this country, and they're polluted by fossil fuels, by coal ash, by petroleum facilities. It would be a tremendous benefit for the poor people of this country to not have to live in this constant pollution. And the healthcare epidemic among the poor people in this country is in a large part due to this pollution. I would also like to say that in a carbon fee and dividend world, which we're trying to bring into being, is that the poor people have the lowest carbon footprints in the population. And they would be the ones to benefit most by a dividend which is given equally to all citizens. The people with the largest carbon footprints would pay the most into the system. The people with the smallest carbon footprints, the poorest people, would be the ones that get the most benefits from a carbon fee and dividend system.
Very nice. Let's check with our roving reporters, Jessica and Lydia. Jessica, Lydia, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, Bob. Our first question is for Professor Freddy Sourgens. It is, what is your view of the role of ongoing use of oil and gas in the path to a sustainable world?
Well, so the ongoing use of oil and gas, to my mind, comes in to sort of take it back a little bit to the question that we've just had, to link it to the discussion that we've had. In that cheap energy is something that benefits really people who are less well off to a greater extent than it benefits people who are more well off. So if you're looking at, and this is true globally, and this is true locally. So if you're looking at the benefits of inexpensive access to energy, and you're looking at what supply chains we have that make that energy available, oil and gas is a key part of that. So I think one of the things, to link it back to the discussion that we've had, is that we need to make sure that people are fully educated about the energy choices that they face, but also about the consequences of all the choices that they've made. So we need to educate people on the environmental impact, and we need to educate people on the energy impact and on the energy consequences for their pocketbooks of the choices that they make. Because I would say there's really no perfect solution. There are only solutions that are more or less sustainable as we move forward. And I think one of the key things that we've seen out of the Yellow Vest protests in France is that the most important thing that we can have for a sustainable energy path forward is that we have a societal consensus as to what that path is, and education is the core to get to that path so that everybody pulls in the same direction.
Thank you. Steve, here's a question for you. The whole purpose of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act is to compel households and businesses through market forces to reduce their carbon footprints. Why do you not believe that voluntary reductions will be enough?
Well, Bob, just look at the evidence. We've been doing Earth Day annually for 50 years. Every year. For 35 years, scientists have been regularly raising the alarm about global warming. Everybody has heard the message, and the polling indicates most people believe the message. But very few of these concerned citizens actually are meaningfully lowering their carbon footprint. The US still has one of the highest carbon footprints per capita in the whole world. And then in the United States, there's also about a third of Americans who are climate deniers, who think global warming is a hoax and the science is fake. They see no reason to quit burning fossil fuels. I have an in-law up in Gower who drives around in a monster F-150 four-door pickup truck that over its lifetime will emit 135 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. He says when it wears out, he'll just buy another. Small wonder atmospheric CO2 levels continue to rise unabated. As we're seeing with the coronavirus, most all people focus on the immediate fear, or in better circumstances, the immediate reward, not the long-term danger or opportunity. The evidence shows we cannot rely on individual acts of virtue to save life as we know it on this planet. That's why HR 763 would be so effective, because it aligns personal financial interests, selfish interests, with the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. Whether you're a climate denier, an eco-freak, or somewhere in between, whether you're a business, large or small, or a consumer of any product, whether you're rich, poor, or middle class, whether you're a government entity or a private citizen, everybody, all these are financially incentivized by HR 763 to lower their carbon footprints as rapidly as possible. So reducing fossil fuel usage becomes an immediate personal priority, not some theoretical long-term goal, which is why all the past Federal Reserve chiefs and America's preeminent economists overwhelmingly support carbon fee and dividend, which is why Paul Hawkins says in his book Drawdown that carbon pricing will greatly accelerate nearly all of the practical solutions to the global warming crisis, like those that Mayor Kelly is putting in his playbook. Most people will not change their accustomed behaviors regarding fossil fuel or anything else because of purely voluntary measures. Some compulsion will be necessary. Unfortunately, there is no evidence that would lead us to any other conclusion.
I'd welcome the rest of the panelists to comment. Do you think that we have to compel households and businesses through market forces, or is voluntary compliance enough?
Let me rise to the bait, I guess. And let me start off by saying that there are plenty of people in the fossil fuel industry who are for a carbon tax. So I am an outlier in that I'm not for it. And the reason that I'm not for it is the developments that we've seen in France, the developments that we have seen in Australia, the developments that we've seen around the world, that to the extent that you increase even marginally the cost of fuel, you're going to have first of all, a risk that you impact the people who are worst off to deal with it the most. And second of all, that you have a massive political counter-movement that is going to make it far more difficult to support sustainable climate action. So the problem that I have with a carbon tax approach really is that it doesn't evenly distribute the pain the way that other mitigation mechanisms might. So that's kind of my objection to compulsion with price mechanisms, that we're pricing the wrong people.
May I respond?
Please.
Well, you forgot about the dividend. Okay, the problem in Australia when they tried carbon taxes on electricity was that all of the money was kept for long-term investment by the government. So all the people saw their utility fees going up, but no money coming back to them. The problem in France with the Yellow Jackets was exactly the same. The fees on fossil fuels went up, but the money was all kept by the French government, and so the people didn't like that. The nice thing about carbon fee and dividend is the money goes back to the people. So it makes it into a new game. You know, as long as they are lowering their carbon footprint, they're coming out money ahead. And that is a big stimulus, which is why the carbon fee and dividend system up in Canada, which is just like the one that we proposed here for the United States, has withstood electoral elections. People know that they can win this game by lowering their carbon footprint. If you don't give the money back as dividends, everybody feels that they're losing. If you give it back as dividends, everybody sees a way to win this game, and they just enter into the new game.
Steve, to play devil's advocate here for a second, that's true so long as people have an opportunity to reduce their carbon footprint. The theory behind a carbon tax is good, and I support it, but at the beginning of the day, it's regressive because you're taxing these people's basic needs to be able to get to work and to cool their homes, heat their homes. Some people don't have the alternatives to lower their carbon footprint like others will. Additionally, we need to find a solution that isn't inelastic, because we know that some people, no matter the cost, are going to continue to drive their F-150s. And at the end of the day, you want to find a solution that doesn't require huge compulsion by government. And right now, oil and gas is incredibly subsidized by the government. I'd be incredibly surprised if we don't see a huge package to protect the oil and gas industry based on the current market conditions. And I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on how much and how quickly we're going to provide funds to oil and gas when at the end of the day, you can find solutions that if they were given an equal playing field, like the bipartisan bill sponsored by Senator Morans and Coons for a master limited partnership to put wind and solar on the same playing field as oil and gas in its taxation and its partnership formations. You could see that good solutions could be implemented if there was really a level playing field and less intervention by government, whether it be compulsion as a tax or through huge subsidies.
It's a good discussion. And
I want to jump in. Can I jump in there?
Please do, Richard. Please go right ahead.
And this is really important because this is one of those areas, Steve, where from the low income perspective causes me to say that I would rather see, not rather, but I would want to see more effort coming from our other areas that's dealing with encouraging folks to want to learn more about climate change. Because what happens, and I'm Steve, and I'm glad, Mike, that you brought up the aspect about the possibility for economic development going on during the periods that we're going through. See, I need the low-income community to start seeing their way out through a pathway out of poverty, through developing and learning marketable skills through programs that's put on by EPA, for instance, so that they can be in a position to start developing some economic development type projects and buildings and reestablishing the inner cities. Right now, the inner cities in many places look like blown out by Beirut in certain places from the buildings and stuff. If we could create those kinds of possibilities, what's his name? Bernie Sanders, came up with a plan about dealing with rehabbing public housing and using those jobs for the people who lived in that particular neighborhood to create both decent jobs and at the same time creating some new possibilities. Now, I'm not saying what you're saying is wrong. I'm just saying that's what takes up the airway. And so someone like me being on the sideline trying to be heard gets pushed further and further and further behind. I just wanted to throw that in there. I'm not disagreeing with you. I think it's fine, but that shows the example of why I think there needs to be more input going into the low-income community about climate change, why it's necessary to do these things.
Thank you, Richard. This is really great discussion. And I think it leads to another good question. And I'm going to direct this one to Freddy. Given our current greenhouse gas emission levels, what do you think is the realistic way to head off the worst of this crisis?
I think what we need to do is we need to have a plan that understands that social systems are just as sensitive as ecosystems are, which means that anything that is too fast of a change has a tendency to be truly disruptive. So what my sense of the path forward is that, look, if you look at what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change tells us, is we have until 2030. And if you look at what is going on in Greenland at the moment with the ice melt that is significantly ahead of where it was predicted because of a high pressure zone that hung out over the Arctic over the summer that wasn't predicted, we might actually have significantly less time than that. So if you look at what the timeline is that we have in order to prevent tipping points from hitting, I don't think that an energy infrastructure swap out is going to do the trick because it won't be fast enough. And to the extent it were fast enough, it would be too disruptive. So I think we need to approach this from two sides. One side is to build out infrastructure and to change infrastructure sustainably away from certainly coal in the United States towards non-fossil fuel electricity to replace over the long term, well, over the midterm, the coal place in the energy mix with non-fossil parts in the energy mix. But at the same time, we also need to look at geoengineering as a significant part in this equation, carbon removal, solar radiation management, in order to tie us over so that we can make the change. And in that change, I would suggest that just as a matter of reality, if you look at how our energy infrastructure is built, you're going to have in excess of 40% that is still going to be fossil fuel for the future. So we need to find a way to deal with that 40% and a way to provide a means to absorb it. And part of what is so complex in this situation is that you also have to look at the whole picture. I mean, one of the truly ironic things about the COVID outbreak that just came out in the New York Times is that one of the reasons that California is less affected than New York City is the use of cars in California. So we need to make sure that we take a holistic view as to our energy future, have a clear-eyed path forward that gets us to where we need to be in 2030, and then on the back of that, renew our energy infrastructure in a sustainable way.
So, Freddy, let me understand what you're saying here. So the Paris Climate Agreement was fairly specific that we needed to be carbon neutral by around mid-century, and all the governments of the world signed on to that. If you say that we're going to use 40%, we're going to continue to get 40% of our electricity from fossil fuels for the foreseeable future, are you saying that Paris should be renegotiated, that the scientists were wrong about the need to be carbon neutral? Or how are we going to remove all this CO2 from the atmosphere that we're continuing to add by burning fossil fuels?
So I do not say that the Paris Agreement should be renegotiated. I actually think that as it stands, it is a good framework to continue talking. I've published on the fact that I think that depending on how they were passed, the nationally determined contributions are in fact binding on the states that made them. I think that the United States nationally determined contribution is binding on the United States as a matter of international law. So I'm not trying to run away from the Paris Agreement, quite the opposite. If you look into the nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, you'll find two things. The first is that we have an achievement gap. We have ambition, but an achievement gap that is built into the nationally determined contributions that were originally made. The second thing is that if you look even more granularly at the nationally determined contributions, you will see that a lot of what those nationally determined contributions bank on is carbon sinks and an ability to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So I think that fundamentally is a technology that is already built into what we agreed in Paris, and that it is something that we need to ramp up in order to sustainably move towards an energy future in which we are going to be carbon, we don't need to be carbon neutral, by the way, we need to be carbon negative in order to sustain climate. So I think that it is that technology more than anything else that is going to help us to get out of the problem.
And that carbon sink technology exists. It's natural infrastructure. If you look at Paul Hawken's drawdown, there's 80 solutions that are currently existing, not waiting on technology from the future that, if ramped up to scale, can draw down the amount of carbon in the atmosphere while creating economic opportunities to the tune of trillions of dollars. I would like the opportunity to be able to get to our 2030 goals without disruption, but disruption is here. It's happening. You're seeing natural disasters increase at an exponential pace due to a changing climate. And we have to be preparing for that. And by relying on slowly leaking towards a change in the status quo isn't going to change or be cognizant of the realities that we currently face. So I think that increasing the existing technologies that we already have, the natural infrastructure being a huge one, is that carbon sink. There's legislation right now in the Kansas House that Rishu has put forward for silvopasture, agroforestry, and carbon sink technology. So I think there's a real opportunity there to be more dynamic in meeting our Paris goals.
I think that there's no scientific body in the world which would agree that we can continue to burn fossil fuels as you suggest, and that we can find sinks for that CO2 that will be feasible. That is not, nobody is saying that. Everybody, all the scientific community is saying we have to quit burning fossil fuels and stabilize CO2 in the atmosphere, and then we've got to ramp up taking it out. But there's none that says we can continue to burn fossil fuels at the rate you're suggesting, and we can come up with sinks available to accommodate all that CO2.
This is a wonderful discussion. With our time limitations, we need to move on. It'd be great if we could sit here all evening and explore this. I want to jump over to our fact checkers. Jack, have you had any questions, any facts you want to have checked for us?
So thank you, Bob. We have not had any fact checks yet, but I would like to remind the participants in the call to utilize the Q&A feature, signifying fact check followed by a colon, and then whatever fact they would like to be checked throughout the rest of the program. And if we don't get to it, we can communicate those somehow.
Thank you, Jack. Lydia, Jessica, are there any other questions from the audience we can help with?
Yes, Bob. So we have a fairly long list of questions now. The first one is for Richard Mabion. How do we go about avoiding a climate apartheid scenario like the Human Rights Council warned of in June?
Oh, I think that I'm gonna try to speak so you can hear me. I apologize for the broken English coming out to you, but I think that it has to do with leadership within the Black community itself. We have the makings. I was asked a question about redlining, and by one of the state legislators. My feelings about it, and I told him, as far as I was concerned, redlining should be a moot issue in the Black community, The reason for that, we have athletes and entertainers that make more money than thou. There's no excuse for us to be putting all our dependency on the system. We need a different kind of leadership. We need to be able to come to the table, not as a race of people, but as a multicultural group of individuals that's dealing with it through economic development. That's what the whole process is about. To continue blaming others for the circumstances that we live in is keeping us from being able to find that road, that pathway out of poverty.
Thank you, Richard. Can't tell if you're done or if it's just the communication issues.
Right,
We
that's
have,
what it is.
Is that? Well, maybe Richard will be back in a little bit. We have about 4 minutes left, so I want to turn to a question and direct it to Mayor Kelly. Besides emission reductions, what other actions would Climate Action KC like to have implemented by our regional governments?
Well, I think the actions that we're advocating for, and I think many members of this panel would advocate for as well, don't just have an impact on our emissions reductions, but we like to focus on what the co-benefits of those actions can be. The economic opportunities for our region are robust as it comes to climate solutions, wind power being a primary leader. Kansas, it's a $12 billion industry in the state of Kansas. There's $20 million in landowner payments made on an annual basis to Kansas landowners, and that's only going to increase with the Grain Belt transmission line being put online and having the opportunity for more wind power. It's also an opportunity for cities and large customers to take advantage of those opportunities through partnerships and aggregation contracts that would allow cities to not only have their municipal operations be run at a climate neutral level, but it removes that cost of fuel from the structure of the agreement, thus saving cities money. Additionally, there's public health benefits. There's increased air quality. There's walkability. There's quality of life issues. Like Richard had mentioned earlier, it's workforce development. It's giving opportunities in the new clean energy economy to those who have been marginalized or left out. So there's good things to be done for their own sake that also happen to all have an impact on emissions reductions, and that's what we're focused on.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment about other actions that we can take within our municipalities to reverse climate change?
I'll definitely jump into it. Needs to be given to the communities. I think that we need to be able to start reaching with the Sierra Club. We call her Reach Her. And they to be able to utilize these job training programs and have it. Luckily for us in Kansas City, Kansas, the mayor supporting organization, EOF, Economic Opportunity Foundation, leading property pro agencies will start training their own clients. They don't have enough, and that need to be to establish relations with business to hire these people, to give them.
Well, thank you. I apologize to everybody for the technical issues we're having with Richard. You know, I really appreciate what you're saying, and it really distresses me that I can't hear everything. Let's go to our closing statements. As you may know, it's an American Public Square tradition to allow each panelist the final comment. And we do this in the form of a brief response to two questions. And those questions are, so what and now what? So please keep your responses under a minute. And let's start with Freddy. So what and now what?
So what? We are responding to probably the largest crisis that we have faced. And so we need to take it seriously, and we need to come together in taking it seriously, and we need to take opportunities like this to make that happen. Now what? We're going to have to continue to find ways to a sustainable energy future. I think that fossil fuels will continue to be part of that, but that we will need to find ways to manage our carbon footprint in doing so.
Steve, so what and now what?
For the so what, I'd like to say the United Nations Secretary General warned us yesterday that the devastation caused by climate disruption will be many times greater than the coronavirus pandemic. If you're serious about stopping global warming, and you should be, carbon fee and dividend is the most comprehensive and powerful tool available. Tell your elected representatives to support the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And now what? Vote climate this crucial election year. Support candidates committed to solving the climate crisis up and down the ballot for federal, state, and local positions. Nothing matters more in 2020.
Thank you. Richard, so what and now what?
So what? That I have found the income dealt with should be program and talk to these esteemed gentlemen, with these esteemed gentlemen, and to want to hear more. Sorry, my community.
Mike, so what and now what?
So what? Climate change is the biggest challenge, but the greatest opportunity that my generation is going to have, that all of our generations are going to have. Now what? Climate Action KC, it's a Big 10 organization of more than 100 local elected officials, businesses, nonprofit partners are putting together a regional climate action plan. It's the first of its kind in the United States and will give us a clear pathway to our goal for Kansas City of meeting our Paris targets, regardless of whether we're required to by the federal government, but also increasing our economic opportunities and taking advantage of the robust design community, the robust leadership in our region to make Kansas City a leader for the rest of the country.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our panelists. And again, I apologize for the technical difficulties we've had. And it seems like we had a really great discussion on carbon tax and dividend. We could easily go on for another hour exchanging ideas on that. This has been a wonderful discussion, and I want to thank all of you at home. I wish we could have gotten to more of your questions, those of you that are attending online. And I want to thank all of our radio listeners on KKFI 90.1 FM. Tonight's panel discussion has been a celebration of this 50th anniversary of Earth Day. So I'd like to get Allison's video back on, and let's turn this over to Allison of American Public Square for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for serving as tonight's moderator. You did an excellent job. I want to let the audience know that we're going to provide Richard with an opportunity to have some written responses that'll be available. We'll figure out where to put those exactly, but we feel that his perspective on the panel through the audio issues wasn't possibly heard, so we'll provide him with an opportunity to do his so what, now what in a written form that'll be distributed. I want to thank all of our panelists, Freddy Sourgens, Richard Mabion, Steve Melton, and Mayor Mike Kelly for an informative conversation. Thank you to our student planning committee comprised of students from all over the Metro for their contributions to this program. Tonight's student-led program would not be possible without the hard work of APS's Spring 2020 intern team, consisting of Lydia Engie, Jessica Sloan, Tavares Piddington, and Jack Still. The program was also made possible to be online by Bob Grove himself and the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City, with support from Unity Temple on the Plaza. I would also like to thank the APS Program Committee for their contributions to this program. Tomorrow, you'll receive an email with a link to a short post-event survey. Please, if you could, spend just a few moments to complete this. We value your feedback and rely on it to plan our future programs and events. I want to welcome you to explore the entire online Earth Day Festival, EF20, by visiting climategkc.org. That's climategkc.org. Further, I would like to welcome you to learn more about American Public Square at Jewell and consider joining us for future digital events by visiting americanpublicsquare.org/events. I want to voice my appreciation for the APS extended team, including Ambassador Alan Katz, Clare Bishop, Adam Erickson, Robert Curlin, Mary Espinoza, Elena Mueller, Terry Turner, Denisha Snell, and Springboard Creative. Tonight would not have been possible without your commitment to APS. Thank you again to tonight's presenting sponsors and partners for your support to host this event. And thank you to our student initiative funders, the Sherman Family Foundation, the McDonald Foundation, and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Most of all, thank you for taking part in our mission to change the quality and quantity of public discourse. If you appreciate what we do and see it as a value to the community, please consider becoming a member. Hope you all have a safe and healthy spring. Good night.